was in that car. So I had the engine, but no car, which I've been hunting for years. And he took me back, 1954. It went back there. 53 did not make the race, and they redid this. They redid the suspension. Made it in 54, what that picture is, and 55. Dad took me out of high school and back to that race, something I never forgot. And chronologically, I was the oldest boy, and I mean, I got the benefit of all those things, and I just, you know, I had a child to die for. I mean, he let me do whatever I was capable of doing without hurting myself, and I just thank the good Lord that it was all part of the deal. These two cars right here are belong to Mary Holman George, daughter of the guy that owned the Indianapolis, Tony Holman, who's ironically that fellow on the far left of that picture. He owned the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Oh, wow. And he had one daughter, and she married a driver named Homer George, and these were 2 or 3 cars. And that ran in Indianapolis and other tracks around the Midwest, and this never ran in Indianapolis, ran on the dirt. It was a big racing series called the Championship Trail that was running all the dirt around the United States, from Sacramento all the way to Syracuse. The original, for those of you who are familiar with the Nova engine, there's one on the sand right there. And I consider myself now the custodian of the Nova engines. I bought all the parts and pieces from the city of Nova, Michigan about 7 or 8 years ago, and have put 3 of them together. The original Nova engine is in the Star 54. It's a sister car to the one in front of it. Yes. Those are both built by Harry Miller for 1935 race in Indianapolis. The one in the front is exactly the way they were built with a Ford Flathead engine, reversed because it's front wheel drive. This car, sister car of the 10, they ran with 4 of the 10 cars qualified for the 35 race. They all dropped out intermittently because the steering gearbox was too close to the exhaust valve, and the bushing froze up. Henry Ford gets very upset, put them all away. In 37, he sold this car to a friend, and they put an Offenhauser engine in. Turned around backwards, and they made what they called the Winfield V8, which became known as the Nova. So if you were to look at these 2 cars, sister cars, I'll lift the hood on this one. Once you want to take a look, you see this Nova engine. And it ran in 1941 at Indianapolis, like this. And then I'll go over there and pick up the hood on this one. 2 of the 10 cars. And you see the Ford Flathead. So it went from 80 horsepower to 400 horsepower. So even though it's the same front wheel drive, they had to upgrade all the gears to take the load of that extra torque and horsepower. So this is the way they originally built all 10 of them, and this is the one that's modified with the Nova engine.
How many cars were front-wheel drive in that race?
Quite a few of them back in the day.
And you think
Harry Miller's.
And you think today,
yeah,
those corners had to be hairy as could be.
Yeah.
Your tail was just
right. So I have one first place car, Indianapolis winning car. It's the Bobby Unser car, and it's back in Indiana right now. I have a shop back in Indiana, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway wanted me to bring it back for this year's 500. To do a one lap pace tribute to Bobby Unser. And so I took it back, did that. Ario Franchini drove the car, And it's sitting back there now, and we'll probably bring it home in probably a couple of weeks. But if any of you remember the Indy 500 in 1981, that was the biggest disputed win in the history of the 500. Bobby Unser won the race, got all the accolades. In those days, they did a rebroadcast. It's the only way you could see the race is the rebroadcast. So everybody that wanted to see the race went and watched the rebroadcast. Drivers, owners, pit crew, fans, whatever. So during the tail end of the race, they came into the pits for a fuel stop. And Bobby comes out of the pits. He's leading the race. And ironically, the pace car with the field behind it is coming around turn 1 as he exits the pits. And you see very clearly in the tape that he moves ahead 7 cars in blends when you're supposed to blend, like you do on the freeway. Right, blend. Right. Well, Jackie Stewart's the color guy. Said, "Look at that! Look at that! You can see it on. You're not supposed to. He's not supposed to do that." So Patrick, who owned the second place car driven by Mario Andretti, protests the race that night, and they give Mario the win the next morning.
Wow.
That picture right there, the 40, that's the winning picture. See how sterile that is? Not a person in the stands, as opposed to there's a picture there someplace on the wall of all the accolades. You know, the Bo Werner Trophy and the wreath and all that stuff. And so Roger Penske's not going to hear that. He owned Bobby Unser's car, PC9B. It was the model. So he files a protest against the protest, and 138 days later, they give the win back to Bobby Unser and Penske and fine him $40,000. Okay, so the reason that space is in the law is that placard for that winning car is back in Indiana because we took it back when we took the car. You know, okay, so the reason I make this thing, I even bring this up, is the second place car is in this room too, for 81. And the third place car is next door. So I bought the winning car from Bobby Unser at an auction. About 3 years later, I bought the third place car from Bernd Schuppen, who drove it from 32nd to 3rd that year in the race. And then a year or so later, a guy calls me up and said, "Tom, do you know that the second place car is for sale?" I said, "I didn't even know it existed." And he says, "Yeah." So he gives me the information. It belonged to a doctor in Canada. I got a hold of him, and I met him in Montreal. He took me over to the museum where his car was, and we made a deal. It's sitting over there, the blue STP car. That's the second place car. So I bought it FOB Detroit because I didn't want to go through all the paperwork, you know, from Canada to the U.S. And so I can't say it today, but I control, because I can usually say the winning car is in this building. Being that the other one's back in Indiana, I control the cars, and it's kind of neat. The Bobby Unser Penske car that I own is one of only 2 of the 18 winning cars Penske's won the race 18 times. He owns 16 of the 18 cars. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway owns 1, and I own 1. So this should be interesting someday. When
how much does he want it?
But anyway, the two-tone, the sprint car over by the door has 2 different paint jobs on it. You'll see yellow on one side, black on the other. In 2018, they inducted my dad into the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame. He'd only been dead for 50 years. you don't wanna get in a hurry. But I thought it was very nice that they did that, and that car is owned by the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. But it's my dad's old sprint car that if you look at these pictures right up here, there's Bill Vukovich and my dad sitting in the car right there at Carroll Speedway, his racetrack. And there's Troy Ruttman sitting in the car in 1949. I'm 10 years old at the same thing, my dad's racetrack. They drove that car from my dad. That car there is the one that's in the pictures. And they're kind enough to let me have it here to put on display. The reason it was all painted yellow when I got it, because Dad sold it to a guy named Malloy, who made it very famous as the American Power Special, which was all yellow. And when it was given to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, they restored it to that province. So when this thing came up with my dad, I got a hold of them and I said, would you mind if I wrap the one side my dad's old colors? You know, because it was so famous as Malloy Black Goose. And they said, fine, but if you damage the paint, you gotta, I said, I understand all that. So I took it back to Knoxville, Iowa, where the induction ceremony was, and put it on display there. People really loved the fact that the car was there, and that it gave a little different atmosphere. And one of these, they told me when I first got it about 10 years ago, they wanted, the question, he says, we want it insured. I said, fine, what do you want it insured for? And they told me, and I said, well, let me write you a check. They don't want to do that. And they haven't loosened up since then, so it's their car. I have 5 second place cars. This is a second place car. Next over there is second place car. Mario is second or first, depending on the argument. The one next to it, the Bobby car, that's a second place car. And so I'm fortunate to have, some fairly high finishing cars in my collection. No, this didn't make second place. That made 4th place. That's the way it is. We finished 4th, 41. Some people say, where do you find these? So, the best way to answer that is when you have sucker tattooed on your forehead. It's really not. It's really not hard. I mean, you can't believe the calls I get, from people. And because of my age, I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I think I'm in recovery because there's actually auctions that have been close here in Southern California that I've registered for and didn't even go. I really feel good about myself that I finally got to that stage in my life that I could do that, because it seemed like I had to be everywhere. I'm trying to think of, you're welcome obviously to go in the shop. There's a GE 350 that we'll be doing. It's under the plastic with the screen. That's a 1964 Indy rear engine car.
What?
Okay, Watson built the sister car to his next door to see. The only 2 that he built, 2 frame rear engine cars. There's a sprint car, red, you see very see red tail, that we restored, and I'm going to put it up for sale along with another sprint car I have next door, just because I don't need them, And it would be the second and third cars I've ever sold out of the collection. Sold 1 car out of the collection. The boat has nothing to do with me. The little boat on the other side. It's gorgeous. I couldn't believe it. Now this guy may be hiding it from his wife for all I know. I don't know, but my son called up one time. I was out of town, and he called up one day and got a hold of the guys working there, and they because of traffic, they live down in Elsinore. They come early and leave early. One of the guys had to stay because the guy needed it in a building like this that night.
Hello.
So I don't know, but I mean, if if he happens to forget where it's at, that's okay with me too. That is a gorgeous boat.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. And, but he's a good customer of the company. And Kevin found a place for him to put the boat. So I did want to explain that. You know, I'm not opposed to boats, but that's not my boat,
So
unfortunately.
you don't rent it out?
No, I haven't even touched it, you know. I mean, it is absolutely unbelievable. And somebody told me he paid a title for it, and we do the engine, so. Okay, so since I haven't been racing, I do a lot of rallies. These are these real nice things you do with different clubs. They're usually 4 or 5 day things around a certain part of the country. Like we just did one up in Northern California, and like the Gull Wing, we use that. And then next door there's a Ferrari that you see, and there's other cars. And these rallies are usually, like for instance, the one we did in Northern California. It has to be older. The car has to be 1957 or older. And we'll do one in Colorado in September. So we do things like that. It's usually very nice cars, nice people, you stay in nice places. It's just really a nice time. So I've taken my helmet off and put on my hat, my ball cap. So, any questions? And we go next door.
Majority of these cars are, you can rent them?
Yes, every car I'm looking at right now will run within an hour. What I mean by that is that most of them are big, where all the fuel's been taken out.
Hey Stu, here's yours.
Pardon me?
I found Stu,
Yeah,
there's
this
his
one
right
here, I
there.
can get that.
That one's ready for you
You can
right
go
now.
right now, that one's right now.
The rear end looks like there's camber and caster.
Yeah.
Back.
Underneath this, you got a half a spring underneath it, so it does the same.
Is that for when it's racing, it settles down?
Do you have any Curtis crafts?
Yes, two, see the number 35? That's a 48 Curtis craft, built by Frank Curtis or Don Lee. I'm glad you asked the question, because that's my wife's favorite car. And I'll explain. So Don Lee was, for us old timers, Los Angeles old timers, Don Lee Broadcasting Company. And he was the original Cadillac dealer for the state of California. And he was connected to Hollywood. So he bought that car, raced in Indianapolis in 48 and 49, and on the dirt a few times. And then after the 49 race, he sold it to MGM Studios. And they used it in the movie to clean the lady with Clark Gable and Barbara Stanley. And that's the reason my wife likes that car, because Clark Gable sat in that car. And I bought that at an auction in Arlington Downs. Is it New York? Someplace back. I wanted the car and flew back and ended up getting the car. And then next door I have a 500S, Curtis 500S. Yeah, that's one of the first of 6 Curtis S. Which means it's all that stuff. After the first 6, those the tail from the example.
This artwork is just priceless. Look at this. My God, look at this. Pernelli Jones. Wow. The schedule. Indy. Monterey. Wow. What a life. He worked hard for it. Good for him. So that's trench shoring would shore up this hole so those workers be safe. That's what shoring is. It's all the hardware needed to. And there's his yard right there. There's his building. He owns this whole area here. There we go. There's his yard here. He owns this whole area. There's the history of the company.
The 20, Le Mans 24 hours when it sprayed the first time. What else, anything?
What's the story behind the GC40?
I bought that, they had a sale at Quail, Northern California, Lines, and I'd taken our children and Sharon and I, and the children were back at, museum Puerto Rico and Purdue Village, and their number 6 was the winning car. And I mean, she could hardly drive me away from it. So approximately a year later, I go up to check the car about the bottom sale. And there's 11 of the 12 in the bottom. And it's just a great piece. I mean, people love seeing it. Now, as a car to drive, it's probably the last thing in here you want to drive because it's so big and heavy. Like if I'm driving a T70 and you're in the Mark IV, I'm driving circle drive. It's made for an 8-mile racetrack for 24 hours. You know, the transaxle in that thing you put in a Mack truck. It weighed 3,500 pounds when you shoved it out the starting line of Le Mans. Full of fuel.
Me.
You know, so it's a great car, great looking car, but it's not something you want to go racing. There's a lot of cars in this place that will beat that one. Maybe not for 24 hours. What else? If you want to, we'll go next door.
Okay.